can't believe it. He really didn't give Jimmy Dips a 10. This can't be right. This can't be right.
Hi everyone, Upthany Lotano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Godspeed You, Black Emperor album, Asunder, Sweet and Other Distress. Godspeed You, Black Emperor is a Montreal-based rock band. They've been at it for years, but they've also not been at it for a few years. I guess what I'm referring to is that they are fresh off of a comeback with their last full-length LP, Alleluia, Don't Bend, Ascend, which broke a 10-year-long studio album silence. Now with this 2012 album, Alleluia, Don't Bend, Ascend, we saw Godspeed bringing their usual post-rock style and applying their typically lush and heavy and gritty production aesthetic to some older but yet to be studio album realized material. Not their most immense release, but definitely an acceptable return. Basically, rock instrumentals of drums and guitars elevated by very dramatic strings, huge crescendos and builds, and there were some Middle Eastern melodies peppered throughout this record too. And I was wondering whether or not they would strike while the iron's hot, come out with a new LP very soon, or if we'd essentially be waiting 10 more years again. And here we are with this new album announced just a little bit earlier this year and dropped right at the end of this month. And it's a short one, just 40 minutes, 4 different pieces, but they all kind of add up into this one lengthy, monstrous piece that the band has been fine-tuning during live shows over the past few years. This LP is not really the long, epic statement that a lot of Godspeed's double albums are, but the 4 tracks here do flow together better than Alleluia. It does sound like a more cohesive piece, and Godspeed is taking a noticeably different approach on this new record over here, right from the very start of the album, which doesn't begin with a super subtle and slowly building sound or anything like that. We get heavy, monstrous, crushing riffs, hulking riffs that have this bright, buzzing tone. Sounds like a bunch of guitars just kind of playing the riff together in unison with strings backing them up. Sounds very thunderous. It's visceral and hard-hitting, a lot like a The Silver Mount Zion Orchestra album. If you're familiar with them, they are a Godspeed side project, but a little bit more rock-oriented these days. But even though I am catching some whiffs of that, what this song really sounds like to me is like an Earth track, something off of the band's last few records, or specifically Bees Made Honey in the Lion's Skull. This is definitely a little psych rock influenced, maybe a little sludge metal influenced. The riff intervals here on this track definitely resemble that of an Earth song. There is a similar heavy, dramatic, western pew pew soundtrack quality to it. This track is just blinding sun rays, tumbleweeds, desert landscapes, but with some Middle Eastern melodies kind of peppered in. And the strings laced into this track are pretty great. The song moves into a few different string movements and features some walls of noise, a really blazing, chaotic guitar solo. Not something that often occurs on a Godspeed album. And this track eventually kind of coasts into this very fuzzed out, noisy drone, very textured, that eventually kind of simmers down into something much more smooth and serene. That's essentially the first half of the record, and it's not bad. Sounds fine. Godspeed coming through with that usual high quality, fantastic, detailed production, but not really the same masterful tension building that I usually expect in a Godspeed record. The second half of this album is really where the album comes to life a little bit more. This once serene but kind of eerie drone turns very dissonant and chaotic, ominous. There is a storm a-comin', and eventually toward the end of this album we get one of the more finishes of any Godspeed record thus far. Very aggressive. The aggression really is next level with all of these crashing guitars and strings and some diddling bass drums. But the thing is, the weeping strings and the twinkling guitar leads that play up until this point are just kind of mild by Godspeed standards. One part of me thinks that maybe if this record were longer and the band tried to tease things out a little bit more, just milk a little bit more drama out of these movements, this would have been a better album. But then again, with shorter run times, the band's debut LP, as well as the Slow Riot EP, are more cinematic and emotionally powerful, and have a wilder approach to experimenting with sound and vocal snippets too, of which there are none on this new record, surprisingly. Overall, this is a pretty decent release from Godspeed. It's not terrible by any stretch of the post-rock imagination, and it certainly still steps ahead of the many artists, the second and third wave post-rock artists that have been ripping this band off for years and years and years. Looking at the basics of what this album has going for it, it should be better than it actually is. But those feelings of overwhelming triumph or that the apocalypse is right around the corner just don't come through on this record. Nor are the soundscapes on here all that evocative. I feel like Godspeed is kind of reserved when it comes to sonic and musical exploration on this album. They don't really venture that deeply into that vast, monstrous, frightening, abstract, and epic sound landscape they're known for creating on records like Lift Your Skinny Fists, like Antennas to Heaven. Instead, they deliver an album that is just so much more straightforward and maybe a little too obvious for them at points. If you're a fan, I think you should check it out, but if you're not familiar with Godspeed, there are albums just a little bit earlier in their discography that I would recommend so much harder than this new one. I'm feeling a decent to strong on this LP. Transition. If you've given this record a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Godspeed You Black Emperor, forever.